We're going to talk about individual productions in a bit, but so Albert Grossman, essentially, you're engineering for Bearsville. And
when I became a producer, yeah, it was in the Albert Grossman organization.
Right, who was Bob Dylan's manager and your manager for a while, and many other people. And was it a favor, kind of a side project where he said, you can make a record if you want?
No, I asked if I could make a record.
Okay.
I guess he said, oh, you can if you want, but they actually gave me a budget to do it because I didn't do it there was no Bearsville studio yet when I did my first album. Even though I've been producing, it's not as if I stopped being a musician. I was still writing songs and I had musical ideas and liked to make records and wanted to have my own musical ideas on record. So I asked for a budget, and they said okay. And since I wasn't hiring a lot of musicians, I had like a rhythm section, just bass and drums. And there were a lot of different sessions, but a lot of those sessions were people that I had worked with before, and they contributed their performances, so I didn't have to pay, for instance, Lee Von Helm and Rick Danko to play on my record. And it was it was known to everyone in the label. It was a vanity project. It was just something to keep me satisfied. But they were a bit taken aback when I delivered the record and they heard like this whole range of sort of musical ideas and also a song that they thought could be a hit single, which they then released and which then became a hit single up to a point.
We Gotta Get You a Woman.
It was called We Gotta Get You a Woman.
I did a James Lipton there, by the way. Sorry.
The what's that?
I was a James Lipton moment.
That was a James Lipton moment, yes, okay. And it started to take off as a single, but this was at the same time that there was a militant feminist movement happening. And some in that movement decided to misinterpret the lyrics to their favor and implied or impugned that I was saying something about women in general, about them being stupid.
But they sure are fun.
Which, if you can parse a sentence, is not what I'm saying, I'm saying like little things that may be trivial, but seem to mean so much to you, little things about somebody. And they started threatening to bomb radio stations and play the record. Things like that. It got to be a whole burlesque. So it never got to actually probably the point it would have gotten to. That was just as well, because even my first attempts at fronting a band in order to perform behind this single were painful at best. They were painful and embarrassing at worst, because I had never fronted a band. I had never attempted to sing my own material live, and I had never attempted to do a whole show of material, which in those days, a set was 40 minutes. A headliner would play for 40 minutes, and maybe twice a night. And I couldn't make the 40 minutes. I couldn't, before I would have my voice blown out and I'd be completely exhausted. And that was the point at which I realized the vast difference between a musician and a performer. And that you don't have to be both, but if you are going to be both, you have to take them equally seriously. And it took me years to build up the stamina and confidence to actually be able to get out onto the stage with some certitude that I can get through the show without losing my voice or collapsing from exhaustion or something. So
and look at you now. I mean,
what's that?
Look at you now. 2 hours
and
of
look
arena
at me
rock.
now.
Yeah, it's an amazing show if you haven't seen it. We're going to fast forward to Something Anything, which is behind us, and I want to have an image come up that appeared in the video we showed a moment ago before you came out. Mm-hmm. The Midnight Special in 1973, and it's a moment many people who were watching that show and are fans of yours today remember. If we can see that image, Dwayne Skoog, who's doing a great job upstairs. That is a famous image, a Lynn Goldsmith photograph.
Yeah.
But to some people, cynics, it's a jump the shark moment. I mean, it's like Todd Rundgren is the next rock messiah, the press was saying. Todd Rundgren was probably on track to be the next Elton John, even though you were probably bigger than Elton John at that moment. I don't mean that. Don't take that personally the wrong way.
The next pudgy, balding, gay piano player.
From Mojo in 1998, whether or not this was the moment at which Todd Rundgren's career came crashing down, it was certainly symbolic of the man's refusal to march to any beat but his own. And I mean, I'm curious, and I think it's great. But you're backstage at the Midnight Special, and this makeup is being applied by Nicky Nichols, right?
No, I had no idea what he was going to do with me.
Okay, really?
No, I had a costumer and makeup guy who traveled with us and would, he would do makeup every night, and carried like a sewing machine and a marrow machine with him, and would, if he got inspired to, just come up with new costumes, which I would wear, most of which would be, fulfilling some homoerotic fantasy of his. And I said, oh, what the hell, I'll put it on, And in this particular instance, he says, well, I got these feathers, and he made this, he showed me the vest. I thought, that's pretty cool. With the, it's got a very Asian-looking thing with the feathers turning up there in the medallion, fine. And he starts putting the makeup on, and I don't know what exactly is going on, but I think, ooh, that's pretty wild. But the coup de grace, as it were, and the thing that really the part that I wasn't going for was, he got out the hot curler and gave me something of a Mary Tyler Moore, like flip at the end, and I thought that's not, that isn't quite right. So,
but you could.
But in any case, it's like, what the hell, you're in for a penny, in for a pound, more or less. It's the Midnight Special. You want to come off like Billy Squier, or you want to come off like the real Billy Squier?
You could point to that moment and say that that was your first twist. I mean, from an audience standpoint, you were kind of on a track. You were a singer-songwriter.
Well, you would have to say, though, but this particular moment here, you would have to put into context. You have to realize that David Bowie is filleting Mick Ronson's guitar at the same time somewhere, and wearing a skin-tight, spandex suit, and as we all are wont to do, and this was around the glam era, so this sort of cross-dressing is not unusual at all, but to take it to this degree probably was a little unusual.
I think especially given audience kind of expectation of what you might be, because I think this was, to many people, their first exposure to a visual representation of Todd Rundgren. So that sets the chapter, I think, for a discussion I want to get into about your musical adventures. What followed Something Anything is probably the thing that most people would have guessed could never follow Something Anything. Something that was...
Or should never have followed something else.
I think A Wizard, a True Star is probably viewed as your most adventurous and influential album in many ways.
It is amazing what time will do in context, because it was Wizard, a True Star, after Something Anything, was considered a blatant act of career suicide. And the whole point is, as I said before, a lot of these things are just vanity projects for me. I like to make music, I like to capture it and listen to it after I've done it, then I like to move on and do something else. And as I said, I had no expectations commercially from my first record, even though it did have a hit single on it. I had no specific expectations from my second record, which nobody remembers, which was The Ballad of Todd Rundgren. And that happened when there was
a great record.
But it meant something to me to kind of become more of a, have more of a song stylist, instead of just doing everything at once. I was able to sort of focus a little bit and pick out a kind of an instrumental range, focus on the piano, bass, and drums, add some coloration and stuff like that, but tame it down a little bit and focus a little bit more on song structure. And that was a phase I needed to go through, but it wasn't the destination. By the time I got to Something Anything, I was getting formulaic. I Saw the Light, I wrote in 15 minutes. It was just like, and it was done, because I had just gotten into just, that sort of song form that I developed on the previous album became habitual. And after I got done listening to Something Anything, and a lot of people don't, or conveniently ignore the fact that there are precursors to A Wizard of True Star in Something Anything. There are already experimental things going on that you couldn't categorize as songs per se, and there are little instrumental interludes and other things that are already starting to break up the formula. But by the time I got to A Wizard of True Star, I was first of all trying not to fall into into that Elton John thing, of just like, here's another one, here's another, give me a bouncy C, I want my material to at least mean something to me, and effort, increases the value of things. Things that you don't put any effort into don't have any value. So just the effort of coming up with new directions, for me, reevaluates what I'm trying to do. And not only was I trying to get away from those specific sort of habits of writing music, I was looking at the form factor that I was working in that I had never actually stood back and looked at. The album up to that point was just that. It was considered a collection of songs. You got enough of them, like photographs, you put them in an album, and that was it. But I thought, what if you look at the side of the record. Now we don't have sides, of course, but look at the side of the record as just completely blank canvas. And there is no such thing as a song form per se. If you want to make a song, go ahead and make a song. But if you got an idea that lasts 30 seconds, that's just as good as a song. If you get something that's just sound, experiment with sound. And I started essentially trying to map the relative chaos in my head, all the different musical fragments and all the different directions that they might go into, onto this blank canvas. And it was the first time I had my own studio to do it, and I don't think I could have done the record unless I had built the studio first. So it was this whole coming together of a bunch of things, me getting self-conscious about becoming a kind of just a song stylist, not a musician. Musician is someone who is continually fascinated with music and continually learns new things to do with music. And the result was something that didn't resemble Something Anything and didn't resemble hardly any record that had been out before that. There were no spaces between the songs. I think something might start and then just stop and go right into some other thing. Music might be bifurcated into pieces, might go into some little nostalgic interlude and then go into some spacey, synthesized other thing. There were actually no rules about it. But what it did do was, more than any of my other records, reveal more accurately what my personality is actually like. What most people call rebelliousness. It doesn't have to be rebelliousness. It just has to be obstinance, that you see things a certain way and you're convinced that's the way that it's supposed to be. You're not against anything, I'm not rebelling necessarily against anything except myself, except the things that I would do that I would later regret having done.